controversial subjects with the facts can be tense. But we are a science here to make things make sense.
Charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent.
Wow, you do have so much energy. I'm so impressed. I'm like,
No,
I guess I am
faking
tired.
it. I'm faking it, and I'm on coffee number 4 because we went to a movie and didn't get home till 1 a.m. last night.
Okay, cool. I see. It's overcompensating because you're making me feel tired.
I'm delusional.
Charisma. We did this because someone reached out about it and they said charisma is warmth. And there was something else. It was like confidence or something, warmth and whatever. But like, it's weird. And a lot of the research, like it does say like, in order to have charisma, you need to radiate warmth. So he was on to something like there's something about warmth, but we're going to talk a lot more about it now. I don't know what exactly he was getting that information from, but it's really interesting. Charisma is being studied.
Yeah. And not to like embarrass ourselves, but it also was prompted when we were watching a little bit of Love Island season 6 USA, which we'd never watched before and got so hooked on this summer. And it was just like,
yeah, we were doing every other summer because we were actually too busy watching Love Island season 6, which I've never seen any other Love Island, but they were extremely, I guess, charismatic.
Or you realize that some people are. I guess like all TV reality shows, you realize some people just have something that draws you to them, makes you love them. Like, yes, it could be their humor. Yes, it could be their looks. Yes, it could be their strategy, whatever. But sometimes there's just something about a person that stands out. And so we want to look into the science of this.
Because I am like, they could also just like be hot on Love Island.
No, but the thing about Love Island is sometimes you're like, they're so hot. And then 2 days later, you're like, I actually am not attracted to them. Their personality, they lack charisma.
Yes.
So their hotness on the surface might win you over. But then once you get to know them, you realize some people you didn't think were hot suddenly become so much more attractive because of their personality.
It is actually like my favorite part about Love Island was seeing like the hottest man you've ever seen walk in and then like 2 episodes in be like, I wouldn't even make out with them.
And that's what some of like the people, like the girl would be like, I don't even want to hook up with him anymore.
Yeah. When she was like, oh my God, his skinny jeans. And I was like, yeah, if you want charisma these days, don't wear skinny jeans.
Okay. But moving away from Love Island. So I want to start. Okay,
I want to just define it. Like charisma is the captivating attribute. So it endows an individual with the power to inspire and influence others.
Which I thought was interesting. A big part of it is always about inspiring devotion.
Which is why I'm like, I don't know if like the Love Island thing is necessarily charisma. It could be something else. Because they're not like,
I think it's almost like you'd probably find better examples of charisma in like a show like Survivor or a strategy show where it requires some like rallying people to do something together.
So, but it is frequently associated with possessing an attractive personality. That's very the Love Island people.
Yeah.
Effective communication skills. Also we're talking a lot about Love Island, but also like when the person can communicate, a lot of the like dud guys are like, blah, 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 and you're like, you're not communicating properly, and the capacity to draw people in and lead them. So like, because it's always talking about drawing people in and leading them, I think that's one part of it, but it is just like, you have a positive effect on people. And a lot of people who have charisma are smiling, laughing, they're warm, they're affable, they have positive emotions, and when they formulate their worldview, it's a positive one.
Like you're drawn to them not through negativity. Although I guess some charismatic people may lean into, like you might follow them because they like stimulate some reaction of negativity.
Yeah, like they have the ability to influence and like guide
but
others.
You obviously need to feel drawn to them as a human.
Well, and it's about making people feel comfortable and at ease. So I think a lot of people are drawn more towards people who are laughing and smiling. Like a lot of negative people don't make people feel comfortable.
I can think of examples that I hate and don't want to say on this podcast that are charismatic people, even if I don't like them. And that's
like you can't even say.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking of like a Donald Trump or a Jordan Peterson, whom I hate. People think he's a very charismatic man. That's all I mean. It's like there's forms of charisma that draw people in. Yes, 100%.
I can't.
They're animated.
They're a charismatic person.
That's what draws people to them.
Okay,
is that they're charismatic.
At least like Donald Trump's hilarious.
Yeah, he is actually funny. But
so in one study there was like 10 like markers of charisma that I thought would be worth saying. It's like has a presence in a room. So I guess that could be like Trump or whatever. Has the ability to influence people, is a good leader, has a magnetic persona, knows how to lead a group. That's all in the influence part. But then there's like the affability part, which makes people feel comfortable, smiles at people often, is approachable, projects positive energy, and can get along with anyone. So I feel like yes, Jordan Peterson has the influence part of charisma, but he doesn't have the affability, which is like, I think making people feel at ease, positive energy, is approachable. Like,
I mean, maybe people who enjoy him and share similar views, they might feel like that around him. Like
yeah.
That's an interesting part about internet personalities. Not that he is an internet personality in a big way, but for any like YouTuber or TikToker, you can kind of perform charisma, but you don't get to see the full picture. Like a lot of charismatic YouTubers, you put in a room and they're no longer charismatic.
Wait, that is like what our whole learning has been with YouTubers when we meet them, is that we're like, they're actually en masse the most uncharismatic group of people. I mean, and it's sorry, I'm being really judgmental and mean, but I think it's because you're like, wait, online you are so energetic, you're so full of charisma, and in real life it's like a harsh difference.
Yeah, a lot of them are introverts, and a lot of them are quiet in real life, and their strength is being alone and talking to a camera in a room and editing, which there's no shame in. I don't think, Mr. Gregory Brown.
I think there's a lot of shame in that.
In what we do. That's why you have so much shame in yourself then.
And that's why I've moved on to try and be an
like,
artist.
Little side note here, I saw an interesting TikTok the other day being like, there's very little accurate millennial representation online from the past, because it's like, when millennials were doing YouTube stuff, that didn't actually represent what like most millennials were like.
Like us, you mean?
Yeah, like think of like most of our friends like didn't really consume YouTube. Like millennials who started on YouTube were kid entertainers.
Yeah.
But that's who like we think of. And I don't want to like throw out names, because I like respect and have met many people that I did like, despite them being kid entertainers. But it's like they didn't really represent like millennial culture of the time. They represented like a millennial who was like entertaining to people who were on YouTube. And that like versus today, so many people are on the internet that you get a bit of a more probably accurate representation of Gen Z.
But then
maybe there's more millennials now, you can get a representation of them in their late 30s. But it's like,
not really.
But there's more millennials now online than ever before, like on TikTok and stuff.
But it's mostly
versus when you think of millennials in 2010, you're thinking of like, oh, like let's do a little challenge and like silly children's entertainment. Yeah,
like that's absolutely horrifying. But then maybe it's because it was like still old, like quote unquote old media, like Girls. Rewatching Girls, I'm like, wow, this is a pretty accurate representation of a white person.
Oh, that's true. Girls is a good one.
No, I'm saying like it wasn't on YouTube. People were actually representing millennials in
traditional media. Yeah.
Whereas now, like Gen Z is like, not me doing a challenge, and then you meet them in real life, and they're like, not me doing, and you're like, whoa, you're actually like the same.
Yeah. Sorry to side note there.
But that was interesting. But okay, to talk about kind of,
I wanted to give one little caveat before. Like I know I have some science, you have some science. Something that's always a red flag for me is when I type in like research on charisma or science on charisma, you see the kinds of links that pop up first on Google, and this may be a Google issue, but when it's not bringing me actually a lot of published research, you always know like there probably just isn't a lot. A lot of it's like just like random website links that are like articles about charisma, versus if I type in like science of depression, you're going to actually get like thousands of research articles linking to proper papers that are peer reviewed right at the top of Google. So that's not to say that there is no like real science of charisma, but that it's maybe be less of an easy, like it's not as quantifiable in some ways, or it's not as studied. Obviously, that makes sense.
I actually think that's more about people manipulating the idea of charisma to sell shit. Is why that's up top.
Yeah, you're right, because it's just like an easy way. Yes.
Whereas like depression, not that no one wants.
Well, people look up like how to deal with depression and stuff. But you're right, charisma people are like, I can help you make more money if you're more charismatic.
Yeah,
and
I bet there's so many like
That's
online fraud. Like now there's so much like online, like you pay $50 for like a course. There's probably so much charisma course
100%.
stuff that's so scary and so scary. Okay, so anyways, but I was surprised and I thought there was a lot more science than I expected. I thought it was all going to be like Psychology Today, top 10B.
That's literally what I meant. That's mostly what I found.
Yeah, but then when I went into PubMed, I was kind of like, oh, people, especially recently, are starting. So okay, because in the past they considered charisma a mystical trait that people either had or didn't, and that it wasn't understood and could be learned.
It's like a genetic.
Yeah, but then they were like started to be like, no, there are actually factors that we can study. And psychologically, I thought this was just one study that was like really interesting because it was the complete opposite of what I thought. But then I was like, this is so interesting. Because I think charisma people think of as like a very positive thing, which like it can be. But they said, if an infant's needs are well met by its caregivers, then the appeal for relating sublimates into quiet confidence and affection mainly towards their loved ones. So they're literally saying if you are like have your needs met as a child, you're actually ending up less charismatic.
Because you're just like, charisma's a skill you develop to get either attention or your needs met.
So they said charisma may take shape when you start to seek and merge your own personality with society or humanity at large through the mastery of a medium such as religion, politics, literature, other art forms, or science. When the search is accompanied by natural gifts in the medium, the recipe for charisma is more successful. So it's like...
Say that last part again.
Essentially, like, in order to be interested in, like, wanting to have influence on society or other people, they're saying you're more likely to have not had your needs met by your caregivers.
Because you are like desiring this.
And then that mixed with the talent in whatever subject can lead to a recipe for charisma.
Yeah.
And then parental deprivation through death, separation, or ineffectiveness often renders a child or adolescent insecure. That emotional handicap or disability is sought to be compensated by a quality of attractiveness that can lead to charisma.
That felt a little like jargon. I don't know.
Okay, it's essentially like, say you, like a parent dies, or you have an ineffective parent or someone who's like distant or whatever, then there is like a feeling of insecurity within the child that then they now feel they need to compensate with the quality of attractiveness and charisma.
Okay.
And I was like, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
Whereas like and I was like, I can notice that when I was a teacher. It's like kind of the charismatic ones are the ones that are like actually struggling the most at home, are really not doing well in school, but I'm almost like, you're going to be a tech CEO. Because you're all of a sudden like...
Or they're like funny. Like, I guess even like comedians and stuff are like...
this hole. Whereas these people who have these like, you know, well met, they were saying they kind of just want to like...
Feel comfortable, feel safe.
Comfortable and loved by their family. It's like, whoa, okay. So charisma is like, it paints it in a different light.
I was going to say like sometimes, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way, I'm just like forming a thought live on camera, is like the idea of people like explaining charisma, or there's so many books about that book that's like how to win friends and influence people and stuff, like people becoming obsessed with this idea. It can feel red flaggy to me. I understand the desire to want to be a charismatic person, but a lot of times it's like people are wanting to be charismatic to manipulate other people. Maybe that's not how people perceive it themselves, right? Like everyone wants to be like, oh, I want people to like me. I want to be fun at a party. I want to be successful at my job. And people look at me and think I'm good at it. But there is like a part or a subset of, especially men in my mind, is like what I picture online, who are like, this is so you can get girls and so you can like get more money and get a bigger job and a better house. Like if you're charismatic, it's like... I just feel like I see that kind of
don't know about that, but I'm like, okay, now this is like, we're obviously formulating thoughts live, but it's like, it's interesting because it's like, okay, they're assuming that that's a good thing, all those things you just mentioned, whereas like this study is actually being like, okay, they have a hole in their heart. Right. Like it's kind of interesting to be like, okay, from the get-go, if you're actually obsessed with charisma in order to gain like
there's something
it's like this article is being like, oh, okay, you were neglected as a child, which is very interesting because I think a lot of those people wouldn't go that deep. They'd just be like, of course it's good to be charismatic. And then it's like interesting because it's like you can be you could be in the study saying someone who has their infant needs met by their caregivers, and therefore you want to be charismatic at a party with your friends and family. Like that is a version of charisma.
Right. Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, you can exude confidence, radiate warmth, have a passion, like have these things that are charismatic and keep it to just wanting to have your friends feel those things.
Yeah.
But when you start to...
I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting others to feel those ways. I guess it depends on your motive for
That's what I mean. I'm like, if all of a sudden it's the charisma of like almost the way I feel like what you're describing, I don't know really what you're talking about is I'm not like online in that way, but I'm like assuming they're trying to create a following.
That or sell products or
exactly. That's when you start
or make themselves famous. Yeah,
exactly. Where you're like, okay, that isn't charisma to be attracted to the people in your circle of life, which I think a lot of people listening might be like, oh, I want to be more charismatic at a party. But
Yeah.
then there's like this other version of charisma that you're like, oh, we're going to monetize it for the masses.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you meant by what we were talking about with the YouTubers, where you're like, oh, they've like tapped in how to be charismatic online, but in real life at the gathering, they can't be. So it's like, there are these different like versions of the same thing. And this studies maybe being like certain people might have had a psychologically more harmful past that might lead them to seek a bigger influence or something like that.
Yeah. And that's interesting to think about because it makes me wonder about other kinds of positive qualities, like being funny or like being somebody who's like really diligent and meticulous when it comes to their work or their practice or whatever. Because I'm sure you could end up saying similar things about like, if you're trying to make people laugh, maybe it's because you also wanted attention. If you're trying to be really good at your job, maybe it's because you felt like you need to prove that you're worth it or something,
that all
right?
sounds really like normal.
Which may be true. Like, it is interesting to think of humans on that level where it's like the things we are chasing actually say more about like what we're missing or what we feel. I don't know. It's hard because like society constructs us in such a way to like chase very specific things in the era that we're living in, that it's hard to know what you would be like if you were like born in a different era. Yeah, where like massive success or fame or internet, whatever, is a thing you feel you need to do. Having tons of money, like. Some people might have just been born 2,000 years ago that didn't have to think about money in the same way. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, we're just like, yeah, my life is just to spend it with my family and work on the farm or whatever. Yeah. Like, just like a simpler version of that.
But it's just like so anecdotal, but I'm like, the most charismatic people I know in my life are not seeking to have huge influence.
I'm trying to think of.
Like, I'm just thinking of like all my friends who like make me laugh and who are just so like, like the ones that have the biggest influence are always the ones that are like a little bit off. That is just making me, it's just making me like charisma can be divided into so many ways.
Yeah.
What are some of your studies?
Well, I would like, okay, the hardest thing about this is like there's just so many lists and words and qualities. I think I'm just going to go to like this research I found on like leadership and studies that were done by like Harvard Business. So take that as you will. Like, obviously they're trying to convince people that they can help them be better leaders. So come to our school and we'll teach you leadership.
That's so scary.
So for me, I'm like, this is a caveat. That doesn't mean it's not, their studies are not legitimate.
Harvard.
But these studies in particular, like when I first thought of charisma, I was like, oh, who are the people at a party that you're drawn to? Whereas this is like, can we teach you skills that will make you be perceived as a better leader, which is not a bad thing necessarily.
I don't know why that's freaking me out.
Well, obviously it's fair. Leaning into that part where we're like, oh, there could be red flags here because the motives might be different.
But also it's like, okay, some people are probably like, I need that.
Yeah, and some people like business and some people are in a world where they're like, I want to develop a skill so that people trust me and see me as valid and see me as legit. Yeah, okay. So basically they have something called charisma leadership tactics, CLTs. And it's basically like they can teach you how to become more trustworthy and leadership like. And there's basically 12 components. And I was like, so 9 are verbal and 3 are nonverbal. I'm sure many of these cross over into just regular charisma.
No, I'm so curious.
I might just read this list. I didn't want to explain every single one, but if you're interested in one.
Are you kidding?
Because like, it just could take so long. And I was like, sometimes when you're listening to a podcast, you're like, another word, another word, another word, another word.
Okay, just go. And then I'll tell you.
You tell me which ones you want to learn more about. And I have the link open to the website.
Just go.
So it's like the first 9 that are verbal. This is 1. Metaphors, similes, and analogies. So it's like people who use metaphors to distill what they're saying, for example, into like an easy way to understand it.
Yeah, that's cool.
Are perceived as having more charisma. So it's like, yeah, you think if you want to be a better leader, it's like good to think about how to say as a group, it's like trying to do this. We're Apple. We're trying to I don't know.
Well, it's like, come on, be charismatic, do it now. Okay,
no!
It's like, okay, we are currently trying to explain to you, I am like the bird, I am the Canada goose at the front of the V. I am taking on the most energy from the wind and I am pushing us forward. But sometimes on this podcast, I need to switch to the back and you need to take over in the V. I don't know. Was that an analogy?
Here's mine. Okay, we're science communicators, and it's a little bit like the evolution of a seed in a plant.
Yeah.
They experiment, they catch the wind, some fly, some fall straight down, some work better than others. we're always experimenting with how to teach people things. Sometimes it will land and it will flourish and it will grow. And other times it lands, it hits the wrong soil, it doesn't go in, and we learn from that. And that seed won't propagate, and so we won't follow that path anymore.
Okay, I'm crying. That was great. Okay, so next.
Okay, stories and anecdotes. So people who are able to like use stories and narratives are more successful leaders.
Oh, wow. This is another good one. It's like I always have my stories locked. Like now that I'm meeting new kids at school, I'm like story locked and loaded.
Yeah.
And then you just got to
That's
like
something
bring
I'm
them
not
out.
good at because I have zero memory. So I'm always like, what is a story about me? Who am I? I don't know.
Oh, yeah. You are. Yeah.
So here's what, well,
You're not a storyteller.
No, because I forget absolutely every story that's ever happened to me.
You are actually a really good storyteller, but I can tell when like everyone looks at you for a story, you like crumble. There's like no, because I feel like you think you're not a good storyteller.
No, I don't think that.
Oh, okay, shit. Sorry.
Well,
or you want to be
now
prepared.
I know I crumble when I'm telling
No,
stories.
you like to be prepared. Like a story
Yeah.
might feel like a lot of pressure for you.
Yeah, or to pull them, I need to pull the memory first. Then I can tell a story. But in the moment, I blank on everything.
I mean, in the moment, like I noticed.
Yeah, if it's like a story, the need to access a story comes up unless someone can, like you can be like, remember we were here,
It's
then
usually
it
me
like
being
unfolds.
Like, okay, Mitch, like
And I'm
holding
like,
your hand.
oh, what? We went to India?
Okay. Next.
Contrasts. I didn't write anything about this, but if you want me to like search a little
Contrast. To be charismatic, you have to contrast. Oh, I guess it's kind of like, yeah, not being like always in one, what's a metaphor? In one side of the tennis court. Like you're kind of able to like see both sides of things and like relate.
Yes. Okay. This is like being able to contrast your opinions with like what's the opposite.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
if you are pushing for like climate change education, and it's like if we don't do anything, here's what the bad part is. Here's what can be good. Here's
Or
what can be
even
bad.
being like, what would a climate change denier think? I need to think about that. Yeah. That is like very charismatic. People who are like, this is the way it is and this is the way I think. It's like, that's not charisma. That's so awkward.
Yeah. Next, rhetorical questions. So being able to ask things. And this was about like leading people's minds places. So that, but without needing to actually ask them questions, right? Like you're helping to craft how they think.
That's a scarier one.
Yeah. 3-part lists. So obviously being able to like, if you just, obviously this is a 12-part list. People are probably like, okay, let's keep going. A 3-part list, I think, is just a really effective way to say, what are the things we need to do? There's 3. 1, oh my God, isn't this how German people do 3? Am I German?
Wow. Who goes to Frankfurt
No, I don't have
once.
I can't do the middle 3. It hurts my finger too much. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like 3-part lists are an effective way.
1, 2, 3. Scary.
And
but yeah.
it's like even in memory, 3 is like a much easier. You can remember a 3-string of
And
number.
jokes,
As soon as
blah,
you get
blah,
into
blah.
4 and 5, it's a much harder.
Humans
to
are
remember this.
obsessed with 3. Continue.
Okay. Expressions of moral conviction. Obviously, like believing and expressing.
Yeah, that's
you.
one thing I read was like believing in themselves and having a cause.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, like when people are like really passionate about something, it's just like it works. You're just like, wow, okay, that's so interesting. I love passion.
Okay, we're going to rip through these next ones. So, reflections of the group's sentiment, obviously, the setting of high goals, and conveying confidence that they can be achieved.
Yeah.
Right?
okay,
Like,
cool.
a leader needs to make you feel like what we're aiming for is not impossible.
Also, even having like convictions that are like seemingly achievable. You know, when you meet people who are like, and I'm going to do this. And you're
Yeah,
just
and you're
like,
just kinda
oh my God.
no,
There's
you're not.
Yeah, they're like, I'm going to go on SNL and be the music and the like acting, but they're like 37 and haven't been in like any. And you're just kind of like, oh, okay, well.
Do
Like,
you know someone who said that to
no,
you?
actually, the idea of that is so mean. I'm not going to bring it up.
The 3 nonverbal things were an animated voice, facial expressions, and gestures.
Yeah,
Now, what
true.
this research found was like, of course, there's other factors that can impact how other people perceive you, but these were the most effective ways of which people would perceive you as leaders. And basically they would show like in groups of European executives with the average age of 35, like their ratings as competent leaders went up by 60% after they were taught how to focus on these factors.
Okay, know what's crazy is like, I know this is Harvard Business School, and I do feel like business people are so uncharismatic. And like, we have had to go to so many like TikTok, like YouTube events where the CEO has to give a presentation, and it is so Harvard Business School 12 steps. They've been told like, make your voice animated, and they'll be like, hello everyone. And their hands are like,
Yeah, it's very
welcome to, and you're just like, whoa. Like, how did they get here?
I think that is because we entered a world where technical skill people were becoming in charge of business, and this is like the Silicon Valley, like people who
like
were
nerds
really good.
who aren't charismatic.
They were like computer coders and people who were developing programs, and then started these massive companies. Even someone like a Mark Zuckerberg was like a computer nerd ultimately.
Yeah,
and
I
then
can't think of anyone less charismatic.
Yeah, then came to be the face of a company, and probably was brought into boardrooms being like, you need to be trained on how to speak so people feel like you're a human.
Interesting.
And I think before that, though, people would argue that business people probably were like always being trained on how to communicate their ideas. But this was like picking a different kind of person who probably didn't go to business school.
I've like seen CEOs use hand gestures where I'm like, they were taught that. And it's like and almost
so
worse.
clunky.
It's like, just make them not use a hand gesture because it's so okay, that kind of leads to mine.
Okay.
So this study I thought was so interesting. It's about trickle-down charisma. And it's like the flow of attitudes, perceptions, emotions, and behaviors from higher to lower hierarchical levels within organizations. So that's how they studied it. It was like leaders who were in businesses who were trying to be charismatic and make the people underneath them charismatic as well.
Okay.
So they were trying to study like how their charisma flowed down, and they actually like got 127 followers and 15 leaders in a large organization, and then they like studied the followers' charisma. They actually asked them
if it like changed.
Yeah, and they like had people observe the followers, and they were trying to like sense what could make someone who's a follower grab onto the charisma of the leader, like yes or no. And it was kind of interesting because it went back to, they were like, charisma isn't a mystical trait. We can actually teach it. But then this like answer was a little bit like, oh, you either got it or you don't. Yeah, in this specific way. So what they found was that there were two types of people. This is thinking of the followers. There were high self-monitors and there were low self-monitors. And so if you're a high self-monitor, what that means is it means that you try to blend into situations. So for example, if someone asked, who does this situation want me to be and how can I be that person? That is a high self-monitor.
Got it.
They have less sense of self. They're more likely like to absorb the charisma than those who were lower self-monitoring and who are in general less likely to change based on surroundings. Okay, sorry. It's so confusing, but I'm just going to explain it. If you're a high self-monitor and you're more aware of the way that people like want you to be perceived, then when you try to be charismatic, it becomes off as inauthentic and people don't think you're charismatic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Whereas there's low self-monitors who like essentially like are more quote unquote themselves. So when they actually latch on to the charisma of the leader, they're able to
actually do it
to pay it forward.
Yeah.
But then the issue comes that when those people who are like low self-monitors, the type of people, the question was, who am I and how can I be me in this situation? Those types of people, if they don't believe what the leader is saying, then they're just not even going to try. So it was like, okay.
Like they need the leader also to come off as super themselves and authentic.
Yes. So if the leader has like this positive charismatic effect and then there's a low self-monitor who is like more authentic in themselves, they can grab onto that and they can become charismatic. Whereas the other people are more likely to, no matter what, try to take the leader's charisma, but it will fail because they seem inauthentic.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's something about when I think of those YouTube CEOs, I'm like, they're high self-monitors.
Yeah.
These are people who are in business who are trying to blend in
and also
get
being
to the top.
a CEO is to self-monitor. Like
Yes.
It's like you need to be somebody who's like pretty meticulous. What every word you say publicly matters and affects the company.
So it's kind of interesting. You're like, oh wow, these more charismatic people are actually the ones who are maybe less likely to become a CEO. Because they're going to have strong convictions. They're going to know themselves. So when their charismatic tendencies match up with a cause or something that they love, the charisma will be like palpable. But it's like you can't force the charisma, whereas the other people can be forced into trying to be charismatic, but might fail.
Yeah,
it was like kind of like really complicated. And as I was reading it, I kept getting confused because doesn't high self-monitor sound like a good thing for charisma?
Yeah, but
so
it makes sense
like,
to me. I'm a high self-monitor. I don't think I'm super charismatic unless I'm I think I can be charismatic.
I think you're charismatic.
I think like you're a more charismatic person naturally because you know yourself better, or like you're more comfortable like just saying what comes to you.
Okay, so this is wait, do you think I'm a low self-monitor?
Yeah, 100%.
Like, because I fart all the time in front of you? No, okay, wait. I've never thought about it between the two of us, but you're right. I guess you are. Yeah, you don't want to stand out. Okay, so I didn't really think about it like in terms of us. So you think you're a high self-monitor?
Yeah, I totally originally I was like,
are.
oh, I want to ask if we each think we're charismatic. I think hands down you're a charismatic person. Everyone says that about you. You can go in a room and be yourself. And I think it's not that I don't think I can be charismatic, but I do think I'm more charismatic when I'm prepared. But
I don't know if that's true. I think you're so charismatic, but I think that's you're a high self-monitor. And
but it helps me to know, like, I agree if we are somewhere and we land on a topic that I'm engaged and interested in, I'm sure I can have like elements of charisma, but I don't know. Like, I'm not as on the spot. I'm a high self-monitor for sure. So it's difficult for me to just jump and let myself be myself if I don't feel like a bit of a safety net of knowing I'm prepared.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about you and your safety net, which is most of the time I'm with you, with close friends, with like whatever. You're extremely charismatic, but you're talking more about the like walking into a party.
I guess I'm not sure. I'm not sure what exactly I'm saying. I mean, thinking of like,
interesting because now I am like, you are a high self-monitor, and this thing is saying it is harder for them to be authentically charismatic. But then on the other hand, I do think you're right, a low self-monitor. It's like if someone if someone's, I don't have the ability to hide who I am. So if someone makes me upset or I genuinely like I'm just trying to think if like someone shows me that their values don't match up with mine, I don't really have it in me to try to be charismatic towards them.
Yeah.
You know
I guess this study's only weird in the sense that it's actually analyzing like the trickle down part. That's the part that like ends up being like not that relevant to our lives, right? Like never am I like needing to look at a charismatic person and decide if I'm going to also be charismatic.
Yes, that's true.
It's more just like in our regular lives.
I know people. I know you're saying it's like kind of a little cringy to be like, yeah, I am charismatic.
No, you are.
No, but the thing that I relate to is like a lot of it was about smiling and laughing and positivity and like I do think that's something that from my parents comes genuinely naturally to me. Like I have a hard time seeing the worst in people. And I think that is when you read about charisma, a lot of it is about literally smiling, laughing, making people feel comfortable. Like my crutch is that I make everyone feel comfortable to the detriment of myself. So it's like,
whereas I feel like most people meet me and they're like, 4 months later, they're like, I thought you hated me.
Yeah, no, I know. People say that about you a lot.
Like,
I know.
What?
I know, and I'm like,
so nice.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like the new people who have to be like, what does Mitch think of me? I'm like, oh my God, I'm sure he likes you.
It's just because I'm more quiet. It's like you exude every thought you have, and I do not until I'm comfortable.
And you do, I think, because you're a high self-monitor.
And I'm a bitch.
No. I think because you're a high self-monitor, you are not expressing yourself. Yeah. You are not being quote unquote, wow, I'm always like, I'm not vulnerable. It's like, I am. In the sense that I can
you don't have the same filter. So you are vulnerable,
which could come off as it's like, but it's not vulnerable. It's actually just like it's just me being. But I noticed it yesterday, like in class. I was like, okay, we're all sitting in this new class. It's like the first day. There's a professor. Like, I'm like the littlest joke the professor makes. Like I'm like cackling because I'm just like, this is so boring. At least there's a bit of a joke, and it's like I'm watching them like attempt to be positive, and I'm just like, okay, like the least I can do is smile and laugh. And then I look around and there's like stone cold faces. Like it is really interesting. I'm like, oh my God.
Well,
like,
see, in that situation, I do think I'm a very nice person, and I do try to make people, especially in that kind of situation,
you would laugh.
I give a lot of attention.
Yes.
Like in those very clear, like if a teacher or someone's speaking to you, it's easy for me to understand the rules. And I'm like, I want them to feel good. Or I'm like going up to a cashier or something, like I'm going to be very kind and make them feel like they're doing a great job.
But I guess I more mean like there are people who are like, they're not stone cold because they're angry. They're stone cold because they're scared that if they laugh, it's
the wrong thing. Yeah.
Like I was literally like doing my laugh. Like I would be like,
yeah.
Like it was kind of like, and people would be like, you.
And some people might feel like that's too much.
Yes, I know.
Like
I know.
You can probably think of versions that are further than you that do things in public spaces.
Yeah, there were a
like,
couple in class. Oh my gosh, I hope no one listens to this. But it's like, yeah, exactly. I'm always like, I don't want to be too much.
Yeah, but
I naturally, like, I'm not forcing a laugh. I'm actually like, that was really adorable and funny what she said, and like,
I think as I'm getting older, I'm more comfortable doing that. And I think this is why, like, as much as I don't do it very much, like, doing and thinking about art is like really important for me, because it's
should you be in the art degree?
Well, I mean, I think for me it's like music, and I often like stumble across stuff that affects me so much, and then I realize it's because they're actually being honest. They're not crafting their like honesty.
Yeah, there was something
they're able
recently
to
where you were like, they're
things.
being honest, and you were like so mind blown, and I was like, what? Like,
There
what was it?
It was a musician I was listening to, and I
Yeah.
was just like, I know musicians are often honest, but lots of music is contrived.
No,
and it's
yeah,
just simple.
it's like for TikTok.
But when something really hits you, you're like, they're just like actually telling you something. And as much as I thought like Charlie XCX's new album was a little on the nose lyric wise, but obviously people connected with it, and she was just like, I'm just gonna write down exactly what the fuck I'm thinking. And that's kind of cool, where you're like, wow, that is vulnerable. You're just saying, you weren't focused on trying to make it poetic. You
And
were
she
just
was like
being honest.
That was like the art side would be like the intention was like she wanted to sound like text messages, and it did, and it came off as cringy sometimes, but then
you're like, oh, she is saying
is
how
an
she feels.
authenticity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like
There's something scary, really scary about doing that and coming off cringy.
And
That
even
is
the
scary.
idea of like music, I think so often I'm like, was this made for TikTok or was this honest? And really what ends up being successful is what is honest. Like it's like
in the long run, I think the hard part, and this goes right back to charisma and the fake charisma, like you said, like sometimes the fake version of these things can get attention, and that's why people fall into it. But I think
it's fleeting.
It's like to have the largest realist type of charisma is when you are actually genuine with that and not using it to better yourself.
Which is why these low self monitors come off as more charismatic, because they're just more authentic people, but then sometimes they just go into the background when there's nothing for them to say.
It's probably a bell curve. Like probably the least and most charismatic people are low self monitor.
Yeah.
And there's probably a bunch of high self monitors who come off charismatic but will never be like the top echelon because it's kind of fake.
It's contrived. Also, I do think this is completely made up in my own opinion, and going back to all the people in my life who are charismatic who are actually just like a nurse, is it's like, I do think that if you are a low self-monitor and more likely to be charismatic, there's also a part of your personality, as we said, maybe you actually did have caregivers that were like quite good to you as a child, that makes you not need to fill the void with success.
And I think like a nurse is a position that makes sense to be draw charismatic people. You have to communicate and
every
take care
time
of
I meet a nurse,
day.
I'm like, so you're the funniest, coolest person I've ever met.
Yeah.
And my point is like, they're not,
but they're not
ones
using
on
their
YouTube
charisma to climb.
Exactly.
And and this may not be true because I'm not in the medical field, but I imagine like doctors are more interested in like high level status and success.
Yeah.
Of course, there's many doctors
and maybe
who
less charismatic,
are wholesome and care a lot, but they may try to become charismatic to assist themselves. Where I can imagine, this is just my own opinion, that nurses are those low self-monitor in some way, so they just happen to be more charismatic but aren't trying to like craft it to become successful.
Even like when you know, it's like why the most charismatic leaders and like celebrities are the ones whose stories you're like, oh, this, you fell into this almost. Like it's like, oh
you
my
were
God,
charismatic
you were
and you ended up
charismatic
here.
And then you ended up here. Whereas like
you
all
weren't
the
chasing it.
We all know the celebrities where you're like, good God, like you wanted to be famous. That's disgusting. No wonder you're not charismatic on like a talk show.
Yeah, I mean, which is sad though, because some actors or whatever might just be like, I'm interested in acting. I'm not interested in being a charismatic personality.
Which is like also
or musicians,
really cool.
right? Like someone might just be interested in making music, and then you put them on a talk show and they're not charismatic, and it sucks that might impact their career.
Kind of like whenever I see Meryl Streep interviewed, I'm like, snooze alert.
Oh, really? I thought she's charismatic. I guess I don't watch her.
Absolutely canceled. Well, like she's always like, it's just like, oh,
she wants to be an actor.
Like she's not as charismatic as she is as an actor, and I'm like, that's actually cool. Like I feel like she goes home and just like reads on the couch with her husband, and is probably like, she just like has a nerd vibe in like a cool way.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's not a way where you're like, oh my God, I need to see her on this late night show.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of like, wait, what?
I've never really watched her interviews. The last thing I was going to say goes back to that idea of, can you craft charisma or is it innate? And I think the reason it can sometimes seem innate is because there's obviously this compounding advantage if as a child you were like teaching yourself and learning how to be charismatic, whether it's because you were like feeling neglected or not meeting all your needs. It's like that thing where it's like I forget what it's called, but where like the hockey players born in like the first 4 months of the year have a bigger advantage because they've had more time and it compounds and they get brought up on leagues. And it's like, if you're young and you're learning to be charismatic, of course, by the time you're 25, you're going to be way more charismatic than someone who at 25 is like, I'm going to try and learn this skill. I believe most every personality skill is learnable. But if you're only starting at 25, of course, someone who started at 5 years old without knowing has a huge advantage, and it's going to seem like it's natural to them.
I think the reason I learned was like being gay. I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to get through life being like the cool jock. Like I got to be like charismatic or else I'm absolutely fucked.
Yeah.
Like everyone's calling me a faggot. Like I think I can like mitigate a bit of it if I'm like kind of fun and funny.
Yeah.
But I do think that like this came from, we'll wrap it up, someone talking about radiating warmth. Like I remember you kept being like, I re-listened and you kept being like,
did they
are
say
you
that?
sure they said warmth?
No, I didn't mean to be mean.
No, because it's weird. And I was like, no, they
memory.
said warmth. And it's like, I'm coming back to that because it's like, that is actually weirdly the word.
Totally.
Like for charisma, because you can't.
For like the highest form of charisma.
Exactly. You can't teach warmth. And like, but you can at least be aware of warmth and be like, okay, it's about smiling. It's about attentiveness. It's about having a cause. Like it's about believing in yourself and like
just being real.
Yeah. Self-disclosure was one of the very like, if top 10, like take my course on charisma, it's like, it's kind of scary because I can imagine if you're not charismatic, self-disclosure can come off as oversharing.
Yeah.
But there is something really interesting and warm about self-disclosure. It's like, oh, you feel that way? Like this is this vulnerable way I feel. Like I think there is a way you can learn charisma. And I do just feel like if there's one way to try and think about it, it's like warmth. And like, I know that guy said that and it was just sort of like, that's an odd word, but I'm like, it stuck with me since then before this episode where I was like, oh yeah, like warmth.
I guess like you can, like, of course, the first time you try a new thing, it's going to be awkward, but it's like you can learn as someone who's an overthinker or whatever you call it, like an over monitor. Like if you're someone like that out there, it's like you can practice being more vulnerable. You can practice opening up, and like it might feel awkward and whatever at first, but then I'm sure that does lead to people seeing you as more charismatic as you let down that guard, so you can just like let whatever's on your mind come out.
Yeah. No, it is really interesting. Okay, whoa. Love it. Let's get into our what did we learn this week?
Yeah,
and then I'm so happy to be back. Let's go.
Yeah.
Weekly babes.
Okay, we'll take a little break and then we'll come back for what'd you learn this week?